All right, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode here on the Lure Lab. It is episode 94, and we are part of the Serious Angler Network. As always, I am your host, the captain, Andrew Full, and we have a cool one for you today. We're talking about a new jig head coming out in the market here from Alpha Angler, and it's not tungsten, but it's not lead. So I think that's kind of really cool and unique thing about it that we're going to talk about. We're going to have Jake Boomer joining us in a moment to break down all the new features of the Alpha Angler ShAAker Head that was just released to the market. So let's get Jake on here to talk all about this jig head and why you should probably add it to your jig head minnow and forward-facing sonar arsenal. What's up, Jake? How are you, man?
What's up? I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good. Was that a decent enough introduction for the ShAAker Head?
The ShAAker Head, yeah.
Yeah.
It's probably more about the technique than selling the product, but it was kind of fun thing to do because we've never done tackle before.
Yeah.
We've always been a fishing rod company.
Yeah. So. You know, I'm personally biased to the rods. I have quite a few of them now. And I think my clients that hop out of my boat become personally biased with the rods. So I only suspect that these new heads will probably up there in the upper echelon of things for people to check out and use, and might advance their forward-facing sonar game. So let's jump into it. Like, what is the ShAAker Head? And I also would like you to dive into like some key design elements of it that make it better than what is already on the market.
Okay. Yeah. But I'll give you a quick backstory on how it happened, because we designed the ShAAker rod, right? If that's all right. I want to just tell people how a couple knuckleheads like me and my guys, Paul and Nick, came up with this idea, because we never set out to do a tackle, but we designed a rod for the scoping, and we were working on a shorter rod for moving baits through the water column, right? And when you do that for months on end, and because it's becoming so prominent in our sport, you end up questioning everything. And the biggest thing that I work on with my guys is landing percentage. Like, if you're losing fish, especially because you feel it, like in tournaments and stuff like that, if you're losing fish, you should probably pay attention, right? So we developed the ShAAker rod, and while we were doing that, we tested it for about 6 months. The head just came as a secondary, like a byproduct. You know what I mean? Yeah. The one thing that's cool about this industry is if you're fishing, you pay attention to every little tiny thing, right? Yeah. It's not just the rod development, or it's like you and I have talked forever about braided lines and braided line knots. Same thing happened with the ShAAker Head. So we were catching them really good. It's a good time of year to be doing that up here in the Northwest. And I mean, all over the country. But long story short, the development of the rod is what led us down the path to making this head. And what was really cool is we have a couple of really amazing lure designers in our area, and I work with a few of them. And so we started asking, hey, listen, we've got this idea about a head, because I couldn't find the right head for like the Sakamoto shad. Here, I'll show this one. Do you see that? Yeah. That's the Sakamoto.
Good color too.
Yeah, that's a really good color. Keep those, buy as many as you can. You know, with a little bit bigger hook, because everybody likes to run those little hooks. But man, if you watch Koya Fujita, I think he won Lake Fork this year, was on largemouth. Man, you don't want a small hook for those fish he was catching.
It was actually Toledo Bend. It was the first.
Oh, you're right.
Year. Yeah.
Yeah. Those are largemouth, right?
Yep.
So we went down that road, and the end result was we made a head, and somebody was like, dude, we should sell these through Alpha. You know what I mean? Kind of complement the ShAAker rod that we created. And so that's how this all started.
And then, like, you know, now we're going to dive right into the key design elements. Do you have a ShAAker head you can hold up by any chance?
Oh, I got
people can see it.
Don't you worry. This one has got 100. This one's got like 100 some fish. I got to line it up here.
Right there.
It's the one I cut off my line after the BAM Pro Tour on the Columbia River. And it's to the point where I finally had to take it off. It's dull. It's crazy. But I caught like 60 some fish the first day with it.
Huh.
So here's the cool part of the ShAAker Head. If you want me to talk about features.
Yeah,
the number one thing that I noticed was you really have two materials that you can build heads out of, right? Lead or tungsten. Well, the problem that and because I'm an engineer geek, the problem that I found was that tungsten is too small when you get the sizes you want for the weights, right? So for instance, a 1/4 ounce tungsten head is quite a bit smaller than a lead one. And a lot of people, the hardness of tungsten, it creates a great return for sonar, but you end up taking the surface area down so small because you have to make it so much smaller. And sonar actually, like if you notice, if you throw out a plastic bait with sonar, forward facing sonar, you can see it, right? Hardness is important, but not more than surface area. You know what I mean? So by making the head bigger and using an alloy that we had to develop, we actually get a better sonar return with a material that's not as dense as tungsten. So we played with everything. And so we ended up making an alloy for this particular head. And this head I'm showing you right here, this head doesn't weigh in at a 1/4 ounce, but the mold that we had to modify to make it is a 1/4 ounce mold. So the idea is that it's still an alloy. It's a metal. It has a great sonar return. It has the shape of a great sonar return, but it's lighter than lead. So this was 3/16.
Now, are you a fan of shiny? So are you keeping them all just plain, not painted? Or are you going to have like colored head options as well?
You know, that's a good question. I haven't actually really thought about that. This alloy has to be heated up a lot more at a higher temperature. So we had to make custom molds for it, which would allow us to do a paint process without actually damaging the shape of the head or any of that kind of stuff. The downside to paint is if you don't use it right or don't have the right components in the paint, you lose some of that that reflection characteristic. I feel like the reflection
forward facing, you would lose the reflection, really?
A little bit. Oh yeah, it's anything that isn't hard isn't going to reflect that beam is back as well. The way this one's designed, I really don't think it would have that big of an impact on it. But that was the first thing. We're like, there got to be a different material. The other thing about using a different material, and this is actually, it wasn't about sonar reflection that actually started this process, but like this Sakamoto head, like if you look at it, man, I don't know, I can't line this up. If you take a dense head, like a tungsten head at the same weight, you get rid of the surface area on the bottom of it. And the head, when it comes through the water, you can watch it wants to fall head first, wants to fall head down. That's because there's no surface area to the head and the weight is super condensed because it's a really dense material. And I found that it was hard to work the bait you couldn't like keep the bait in front of them without it falling down and falling forward. So we did a bunch of water testing where we used the bigger heads and realized that the bigger, lighter head actually has more surface area and keeps the nose up. And the bait can roll instead of doing this.
Instead of like head down.
Yes. Yeah, it kind of felt like you're like, man, I got to fish this thing faster than I want to. And I'm fishing it away from the target, right? You get those negative smallmouth. They're hanging there. They're interested. But to keep it in front of them and keep it above their head, that's another part of this technique that we've really learned is keeping it above their head is really important. You're fishing it fast enough that they lose interest. So by making a lighter a material that's less dense, you're able to hold that bait flat and keep it above their head and move it away slower. And that was that's actually where it started. And then actually my the guy that's doing all the lure design stuff, helping us out, sent us all this sonar homework he did. So that took us down the other geek where, we're like, what does sonar reflection look like? What shape is the best for sonar reflection? Obviously you want to see your bait to know how to adjust its movements to the reaction of the fish. So how was that for a geek out? Like I tend to geek out on your lure labs.
No, we like it when you geek out on all of our episodes. It doesn't matter what it is. So no, but that is interesting because like I've noticed that with like particular plastics in general. Like I think that's part of the reason why like Z-Man baits were designed and huge right off the beginning, right? Like that really porous style plastic that kind of floats better. And now you're starting to get into more like heavy, dense, salted plastics for shaking and forward facing. That's causing the baits to fall faster. So you have to fish them slower. And I wonder if that's why Gussie was onto something back then when he was moping or tight lining that bait down, because it would give it that hover effect with that more buoyant plastic.
Right. Well, here's the way I look at it with this technique. If they're feeding, it doesn't matter what you throw in there. You know what I mean? Like
it's tricking the negative fish or the neutral fish.
Right. Like I was fishing a pro-am a couple of weeks ago and my co-angler was kicking my butt with a Ned rig. And so we had to use the Ned rig. Well, there was a time of day that they got pretty aggressive. So I could see them, you throw at them and like, they're not going to eat it. I'm just going to throw it to the bottom. And I could throw it out and they're eating the Ned rig out off of, like they're eating a Ned rig on the fall. Like it doesn't matter what you throw. Yeah. Like that, what does that look like? A turd, right? They eat it. And I'm like, I can't believe we ate that. But that's a phase, like that's a 1 hour window in the day fishing. So a lot of the times if they're super negative and they're kind of just hovering around, not being, you need to be able to keep that bait like right in front of them. I also think that's why like the Z2s work so well because they float. You know what I mean? I think those guys.
Z2 fan.
Yeah, they float, and I feel like those guys know to just keep them there longer. But it's like dragging a drop shot around. Like sometimes when they're negative, the biggest fish you catch is when you're not moving the bait at all.
Yeah.
In this particular environment, you're trying to get a bait down to them, but keep it there. And so that's why we started working on this alloy to make a less dense version, so that we could kind of keep that bait, trick those ones that aren't just going to eat it on the fall and jump on it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So with this alloy head, right? Like as you're trying to trick fish in, are there multiple different sizes that you guys are making them, or is it one straight size jig head?
We have two sizes. We have the 4 gram, which is my lighter one. This one would be like, so it's a 3/16 size head, but it comes in at a little bit less than that. So it's not down to an 1/8 ounce. It's in between an 1/8 and 3/16. And then we have the 6 gram, which is your 1/4 ounce size. That's in between that 1/4 and 3/16.
Right.
I think most of the time,
1/4 is normally 7 ounces. It like 7 grams, right?
Yeah. It's a little bit. It's like 7 point. I don't want to quote it and be wrong. It's
like
almost
7.3. Like
or something like that.
Yeah.
Yep. So yeah, in kind of in that game, but the head itself is 6 grams. It's the whole thing, hooking everything.
So hooking everything.
Hooking everything. Hook keeper. We did use my favorite hook keeper. Some people hate this.
I'm a big fan of screw locks.
I do. Yeah. Especially with like Sakamoto shads being like, what are they, $3 a piece? You know what I mean? Like, it does good. If they eat the back, they tear them in half. But generally, if you catch a couple big ones, you get to keep that bait on there for longer. You don't have to super glue. And once you start super gluing heads, you ever notice that just kind of ruins the head? It gets gulpy and it's got a bunch of junk on it.
Yeah. You're sitting there with like a fine razor trying to scrape off the glue.
Right.
Like the hook's still good, but the head is crap.
Yeah. Well, and I hate that. Like when you're having to super glue, I get it if you have to do it, but if you don't, but like my my bibs, my buck and bass bibs, which are like $1,000 bibs or whatever, just covered in super glue from super gluing, and I'm like,
you get stuck on your fingers and you're rubbing it. You have to rub it on something. Oh yeah, love it. Now, I want to talk specifically about the hook, because you used a different style hook, and kind of dive into like the minute details of it and how this hook is meant to be fished higher, right, than on the bottom.
Yes.
And can you dive into all that?
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know if you can see it again. This hook is not in the bass market. It's a Gamakatsu hook. I believe it's in the salmon steelhead market. Once again, my lure designer, when we were just going through hooks, we were trying different hooks out. But Brandon had a hook last year, and if you remember, and I remember this because I talked to him, but he had a really horrible event in St. Clair at the end of the year that hurt his chances for the Classic, and he lost a ton of fish. Like after he had hooked them, when they come up, they come up, especially on your lakes, where they come up and right before they're at the surface, they see you and they do that where they kind of roll. They do like a 180 and they turn around. They all popped off. And he was buying these hooks from Japan. I can't remember what it was, but we realized that there was this scenario. There's a lot of lost fish in the way we're fishing. Some of it's the slack in the line. Anyways, long story short, we tested a whole bunch of hooks. We ended up with this one. It is a 1X hook. I mean, would you say that's 1X? Yeah, it's not a medium wire.
It's definitely a little thicker wire than what I would be accustomed to.
Right. But because it kind of has that roll that, I don't know if you'd call it a side wash, but it kind of rolls in. When we started using this hook, when they ate it up in the water column, they'd either roll it over and it'd go right through their side plate and they're screwed and it has a huge nasty barb on it. Or if you got them right on top, it went right through the top of their mouth. Our landing percentages, because we pay attention to this stuff during testing, went up like 25%. You just didn't lose fish. And how I knew that it was successful is I'd sent them a bunch of these out to my staffer guys. And when the northern swing came, they're all called and said, I need as many as you want. I don't care what they are, just send them to me. And so it's the best hook for baits moving through the water. It's also my A-rig hook now. I love it on the back of an A-rig. The head being a little bit bigger forces the water around the head, and you'll be surprised. You actually get more bait movement when you do that. So on an A-rig,
causing the head to roll.
Yes.
Instead of just the tail kick.
Yeah. So you get all this roll on it, but you got a 1X hook. You can put it on the back of like a 20-pound test and a wide glide and blast them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, that's what I need those for. It's about to be A-rig season here.
Yes. You're going to need a bunch of them. Yeah. You're going to need a bunch of them. The problem is the hook's so good. You got a good hook in them. You know that because they ate it up in the water column. So I'm just boat flipping. I was boat flipping doubles, just trashing my A-rig. My A-rigs are just falling apart instead of just slowing down and grabbing the A-rig.
We use 5 hooks over there on an A-rig.
No, we can only use 3.
See, we're allowed 5. We can get down big, mean in business. Like you get 3-4 pounders on at once. It's terrifying.
Yeah. It's a disaster. What I don't care. Once you get in the boat, you still have this huge disaster, right? The A-rig, you're trying the A-rig not to be bent out.
Oh yeah, you almost always get a hook in your arm or your leg.
Oh, yeah.
It's just...
I had one hanging off the power wire of my Solix. I'm like, no, and the fish is driving the hook through the power wire. Yeah.
Game over.
I messed up so many A-rigs with that thing that I had to zip tie them together to keep the head from coming apart. I had a big zip tie keeping all the wires in one spot. Oh yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So it's a good swim bait hook. Here's another one that I use on it. This swim bait. Everybody knows this swim bait, but
was that Skinny Dipper?
Oh yeah. Skinny dippers are back. I kind of feel like, especially in the smallmouth world. That's what I was putting on my A-rig was a bunch of skinny dippers, but that hook is good for them. It gets them good. Here's the thing about the hook. We are so refined in the way we did this hook. There are times when you throw out a group of fish and they don't eat. And one of the things you can do is just let it go to the bottom and hope one of them is just kind of mildly curious. He's kind of negative. He kind of floats down and you just leave it on the bottom. And I think you could probably attest to this. This hook is not great when they eat it off the bottom. I think the landing percentage plummets if they eat it off the bottom. I think it has to do with the way the hook sits on the bottom. It's kind of pointed back down towards the head. The way they eat it off the bottom is different than the way they eat it in the water column. If that's happening a lot, I will actually rig up a different hook for stuff that sits on the bottom.
Yeah.
Like my Ned rig hook is better for bottom fish. You know what I mean? And it's just a standard round bed where when they eat it, that point is in the right place and it drives when you set the hook. This particular hook is way better when they're up in the water column.
Yeah, that's a style of hook that you want when kind of like a treble hook, right? Like treble hooks are great for catching fish, but you lose a lot of them, especially if you're like dragging the bottom, popping it off. I find like if they eat like a jerk bait, for instance, I find if they eat it higher in the water column instead of dredging in the bottom, your land ratio goes way up because of the style of hook. Or if you're dragging a crankbait and they're sucking it off the bottom, I feel like you lose more fish than if you stop for a second, they eat it up high because the way they grab it is completely different.
Yeah, the way they have to suck it in or inhale it when it's on the bottom. It's something about the way they do that. I don't like the hook. So we're actually working on a version that has an O'Shaughnessy bend because I'm not a big round bend fan for any of this type of technique. But
called the bottom banger.
The bottom bagger, yeah. You're gonna have to have 2 of everything set up, depending. I mean, when we go after fish and you're fishing tournaments, you have 20 rods on the deck, right? Whatever mood they're in, you might grab a different bait. But as far as like catching them, here's the one thing: is catching them up in the water column. I got the benefit, the double-edged sword of fishing a tournament with Polinick the other day, a couple weeks ago, and while it's a double-edged sword, it's because you think that you know what you're doing in this sport, and then you fish with a guy like that, and you realize where you're really at. You know what I mean? Like, but I kept losing them. I'd lose one here, lose one there. And when we first started developing this head before the ShAAker came out, I was using a lightsaber, so I had a lot more power. But what I couldn't do was keep that bait in front of them. The lightsaber, a little bit more length. I was moving the bait away from too far. So when we developed the ShAAker, it's shorter for that. Well, I started losing fish. And one thing Brandon told me was with this hook, one thing that he found out is you don't want to pull drag when you set the hook. And I'm that guy. Maybe. Yeah, and I'm not that guy. Like I set the hook hard. I want to feel the drag go a little bit so I don't break my line. Brandon was throwing 12-pound test with this setup, and I was throwing like 10. And he goes, if you pull drag, you're not driving this bigger hook through their mouth. As soon as I locked that down, the very next week I went to my pro tournament on the West Coast or Columbia. I lost like 3 fish in 3 days, and I caught 128 scoreable keepers. Like I crushed them.
Now let me ask you this: are you a loop knot guy or straight to the eye tie?
It's right to the eye.
Really? Have you tried a loop knot yet?
The guys were showing me, and I'm like, man, I don't know. No, I haven't yet. It's something I should try. Right? Try the loop knot to get that little bit more of the roll in the bait.
So I use like on the range roller head, right? I tie straight too because it's designed to rock. Whenever I have a ball head, I actually do like just your standard typical Rapala loop knot. And what I found with a round ball head is with the slightest rod movement, that bait will actually rock almost on a straight reel.
No kid.
Yeah, with the loop knot.
Try it now.
So yeah, just the standard Rapala loop knot is the best one I found. And I've both flipped 4.5 pound smallmouth with an 7 pound test and it doesn't break. So I'm not that worried about it.
so as soon as we get off there, I'm gonna have to go to the lure lab and find out how to tie a loop.
No, I'll send you what loop knot I do.
Oh, all right, but there's not a lure lab episode I should be watching.
No, I should make a reel on it, but like so I took it from spay fishing for like steelhead, and that's how we tie our spay flies on, because you want to have a loop on it. So when that bait undulates through the water, the natural current causes it to like shift back and forth. You only want like 1/8 of an inch between your knot and the hook gap. What that causes that bait to do, even on the fall, it will sit there and shimmy on that loop knot instead of just kind of rotating. It'll kind of give it more of a normal horizontal fall. Yeah. But yeah, so without line, you make a loop in your line, you give it like a 4-inch tag. You go through the eye, you go back through the loop that you created, you wrap it like 5 times, pinch it, go back down through. You pinch the loop that you created about where you want to get it wet and just pull it tight.
Really?
It takes 10 seconds.
Lure Lab episode 97. We're gonna have to do.
We're going to have an instructional loop knot video.
Well, it was funny because after the last pro event, I got third, and I got beat out by a guy from Arizona who had never even been there, stud Conrad Demix, who is an alpha angler, and him and Colby Pearson, who's kind of like the new West Coast hotness, right?
Yeah,
they're talking about their loop knots, and I remember the first thought I had was, I'm such an old school grinder that I'm like, I'm not changing. Like, my knot is my knot. You know what I mean? I don't ever want to mess with anything, because if I were to break one off, oh, dude, the engineer in my head would be spinning. I probably wouldn't be able to finish the tournament.
And a lot of loop knots are terrible. Like, there's a lot of them that have really low break strength, but I found like 10 and 12 pound tests on that Rapala loop knot. If I can handle like a 12 to 15 pound steelhead that's screaming 100 yards line, I'm not afraid of a 4 pound bass.
Yeah, 100%.
So like,
we'll have to try this after this.
Yeah.
I got to actually have a month off from tournaments, and that's what was my plan, was just to go mess around with all this stuff. But and we actually feel like we were just on time with this head when we released it, and we got 3 or 4 really good tournaments on it. But we've actually had it ready for like 2 months. But this season hit, and everybody, you know what I mean? We'd get a batch of them, and out they'd go to the guys testing, which made me feel better about releasing our first piece of tackle, because it seems like it's pretty successful. But
yeah, I need some now. Thanks.
Yeah, you need to call Brandon, have him drop some off on his boat phone.
You know, it's funny. Like, I don't even have Brandon's number. I'd never like reach out to him or anything. I probably should, but I let Brandon do his own thing. I don't want to be another guy that bugs him. So
one thing I learned about him, and one thing that I think is super cool about being a business partner with him and working together with him, is that he's a junkie. He is an absolute addict when it comes to tournament fishing. You know what I mean? Like, we did that tournament. He had to come home from iCast. And his plane got delayed from that big IT outage.
And he's like, I'll be there.
Yeah. And he goes, I may not get in till midnight. And like, he would have literally got like 2 hours of sleep if that would have happened. I said, don't worry, I'll fish the first day without you. You know, like, go see your family. Nope. He finagled a way to get home in time, test his boat out. And he was there the next morning, just exhausted. But there's a whole nother gear when he's in the boat. You know what I mean? Most of the time I just stood there and was like, what could I learn other than the fact that I'm so outmanned? This, you know what I mean? There's just another level to that guy. Crazy.
I love it. It's good though. It's real good.
It's good for you. Yeah.
So
no matter what you're the best at in this world, there's always somebody better. That's some, you know what I mean? You always got another level you can get to.
I'll tell you, like the most frustrating thing for me is when I'm on the water like 4 or 5 days a week. I'm out there a ton. I'm like, why the hell am I struggling to catch these dang fish right now? And I'm like, you know what? It's the fish. It's not me. I know what I'm doing. I just don't want to bite.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not blaming myself. Yeah.
Stupid fish.
Stupid fish.
Like I start getting mad at them. But like the biggest takeaway I learned this year from guiding is instead of running around everywhere, because, you know, it's not just because prices of everything are high. The one day I was like, there's giant smallmouth in this area. They're going to bite. And I was like, I don't care. I told my clients, I use a really good stick. I go, I don't care how long it takes. But when we make these fish bite, they're going to be giants. And we waited like 3.5 hours. And we're looking at them. They'd run away. And I'm like, we get one to go, it's going to break loose, right? Finally, I found the one rock pile that one wanted to bite on, and the entire shoal lit up for 2.5 hours. And like this big thing went off in my head. I'm like, I just need to be more patient, because I'm a boulder runner. Like I'll run 150 boulders in a day in a tournament. And I'm like, sometimes I just need to be a little bit more patient. Yesterday, same thing, tough bite on a guide trip. All of a sudden we got one of them to fire, and then it was like all hell broke loose. Doubles, triples, like hour and a half later after fishing the same 100-yard stretch of boulders, they lit up. After we've thrown to them 100 times, we got one of them to bite, and then it was on. And I'm like
the mood of the whole 100-yard stretch changed?
Yeah, the entire 100-yard stretch lit up. It didn't matter where you cast it. I'm like, there's something to this, because it's happened 7 times this year now where I just like sit there and like I'll change my boat position, and then as soon as one fires, they all fire.
That's crazy.
It'll be like 30 minutes to an hour of madness. Then you can't get another bite after that. But you'll catch your biggest fish of that day as soon as one of them fires. It could be a 6-incher that fires or a 6-pounder. It doesn't matter. They all fire.
It could be that feeding window we talked about too. Do you ever want like?
It could be. It could be.
The only test you didn't get to do is you didn't have the new ShAAker Head to see if you could have really hung it there just forever.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like they would only bite one bait, one color, and it was like you had to dead stick it for like 2 minutes, right? And then just give it the tiniest shake, and all of a sudden just like feels weird. And you really like he's there. They would bite, but they weren't like aggressively biting. But as soon as you got one to go, if you followed that same pattern, you would get them to bite.
Yeah, that's a tough. That's that used to probably not be as tough until forward imaging happened, right?
Yeah,
because before you'd have just they're not here, I'm out, right? You wouldn't have stuck around. But now that you can see them, you have to play this game in your head. Like, is this a mood deal? Will moving help me? Especially in tournaments, right? Like, will moving help me? But in the past, you didn't know they were there. You could just be like, they're gone. Maybe you see them on 2D, you know what I mean? But now we know so much about what we're looking at. Like the guys that are really good at it, they won't Brandon won't throw at something. That's not a bass. Like, well, how do you know? Like it's not a bass. He won't even throw at it. Like I could just tell by the way it's in the water. I could tell by the shape.
Or how fast it's moving. Like, like here in Erie, like our 3 big fish that we have out deep is smallmouth, walleye, and sheephead. And I'm to a point, I know what a walleye looks like on my forward, and I can tell what a sheephead is because the sheephead doesn't stop moving.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. And then the smallmouth will just sit there like a foot off the rock, like just sit there, and there'll be like 3 of them. Like, I know those are smallmouth. As soon as that bait hits the water, they go up. They go back down.
They go back down. Yeah, but in the past, you would have never done that, right? You'd have never like me. I wouldn't have. I'd have been like, they're not here for whatever reason. It wouldn't matter why I moved. I would just move because they're not biting. But now we have all of this information about mood and stuff like that. And I think there's some negativity about forward imaging. But what the positive is that we're like really adjusting to the way before it was, you do this and then you do this. Now you get all this information back and you're like, hey, there were times where I could have waited 2 more minutes. Or like in your case, we sat down. If your customers really wanted to just catch big ones, it's worth it. I know they're here. The minute it happens, we're going to
catch some big ones. Yeah.
Right. The trip is a success. But before you're burning gas running across the lake looking for.
I'll be like, we're going to go hit 60 rock piles today. And some of them are like 8 miles apart from each other, but we're going to do it and see if we can get a couple big ones. Now I'm like, we're just going to wait it out. And if one bites, we're probably going to catch 10 to 15 more in the next 30 minutes. And that'll probably be our day. But those 3 or 4 of them that bite are really going to make our day in this one area. And they're like, yeah, let's do that.
Everybody's worth. Somebody made a comment about, if they were to ban it or whatever, like all this talk about that kind of stuff. But I said the defining factor in all of this conversation isn't about what we know about our sport or how much more fish we catch. The defining measurement for me, being a tournament angler versus like just a fisherman, is if I put a non-tournament guy in my boat and I said, hey, here is this non-traditional way to catch bass. This thing it's forward imaging. If I turn it on, we're going to catch more fish. But would you prefer that I turned it off? Because it's not, you know what I mean? Like,
and they're all going to say, no, turn it on.
No, every guy, you would.
Yeah.
Like, no, turn that thing on. Take me to the fish. I want to catch fish. I'm not out here just for the sun up and the sun down. I want to catch fish.
Yeah. And it's such a valuable tool for me with guiding too, because I don't and I'll throw it right out there. Most of my clients that I have cannot make the cast that it requires, right, to hit that beam to make a good cast. So what I'll do is I'll scan an area off to the side of what I want them to fish. And I'll be like, all right, you're going to cast from here to here, and you're going to kind of like in a traditional 2D sense. Like you got the rock pile marker off of it 70 feet, and you're going to carpet bomb until you get hung up on that rock, or you're going to catch a bunch of fish. And it's all like in this general range. Just keep firing there. And when you hit it, you're going to know because you caught a fish. But I'll use the forward facing to see if the fish are actually there before I spot lock, and I'll just keep moving if they're not. But if they're there, I'm like, all right, just cast 60 feet roughly off to that side and carpet bomb at 1 o'clock to 7 o'clock. And you're 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock, and you're probably going to catch a couple fish. And they're like, all right, easy enough.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Just information is so awesome. Yeah. It's so cool to like unlock the unknown. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's one of my favorite parts about it.
And I've found like so many things that fish relate to because of it that I would have never found just side scanning or 2D. It's like, oh, why are they there? That doesn't make sense. Like, and then they're there for 4 days straight, and you're like, yep. Then you go and side scan, you're like, oh yeah, now it makes sense why.
Yeah. The one that eye opener for me is because we don't have spotted bass where I'm from. So I got to do a spotted bass tournament on Shasta at the beginning of the year, and understanding they're a goofy fish compared to even a largemouth, or you know what I mean? They're just goofy, especially on that body of water because it fluctuates so much. So what they're on at any one given time, you know, that whole lake looks the same to me, but it's not. There's such subtle little differences, and my eyes roll back in my head, those stupid spots. But I at least understand a little bit more about them every time I go because of the imaging. I could be like, you know, there are times where you can't see them on imaging because they literally lay in the red clay. Like when you catch them, they've got clay on their bellies. It's a weird thing to me. Like,
Smallmouth do the same thing in the Great Lakes. They'll lay in mud, and when you catch them, you're like, the whole fish is pale yellow, white, and all of a sudden its belly is like red and brown and black, and you're like, oh, he's laying down there in the mud.
That's Sammy. That's how you know they're negative. He's so lazy. He's laying down in the mud. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and like. We'll have perch that get in the mud in the fall, like mid to late fall, and they'll just be out there gorging on like 8 to 10 inch perch in the mud.
Huh. That's crazy. Once again, those are things that I
would have never found those fish without forward facing. I would have never figured it out without forward facing. And it's just like, they're not on rocks. So what the hell are they doing? So I just was like, oh, let's go see if I can find a perch school and see if there's any smallmouth mixed in. And sure enough, like 4 of the biggest fish I caught all fall were in that school of perch, and we caught like 100 of them out of them. Like,
that's awesome.
There they are. Stupid fish.
I think the coolest thing about this sport too, and one of the things that I think is rewarded the most, is being uncomfortable a little bit about what you're doing. You know what I mean? Like, like going and looking somewhere that doesn't make a lot of sense, so that you're actually questioning, you know, the old ways of doing things. And like the best fishermen, like once again, I'll bring Brandon up. I remember we were going to a spot, and I'm like, hey, the spot's over here. And we're in a little tournament last fall. And he's like, let's go look over there. And I'm like, there's nothing over there. Like, why? Like, I was upset. I'm like, you're taking tournament time out. But he loves to be uncomfortable. Well, let's just go over there. And, you know, what if they're over there? Sure enough, it was some dumb ball of bait that I don't even know why they're there. And there was fish on it. And in the middle of nowhere. Like, like, how do you compete against this? But that uncomfortable approach to looking for fish just got a little bit easier when you could actually see a little bit, you know what I mean? Where you can get kind of the idea of what's out there. Is there bait out there? It's a lot harder to see that with traditional sonar. So
and I want to throw this in there too before we wrap up. Like, doesn't matter what jig head minnow you're using or what jig head you're using, but you can catch them without forward facing sonar throwing a jig head minnow.
100%.
Yeah, you just
100%.
You just have to know how to count and how far down it is in the water column as your bait's falling down. It's old school and lining up your cast, but if you count, you'll know how deep your bait is based on how fast you retrieve it, and you'll catch a lot of fish that way.
100%. And I've got a perfect example, and I'm going to call out a name here in the Northwest. He's an awesome fisherman, Jake the Snake Anderson, and him and I get in arguments about forward imaging, but he's always cashing checks. He did good in the Columbia River last month. But he was like, he goes, the minnow was something we never did. Why do we do it now? And so he just went out to areas where he knows where fish are at and just threw a minnow out, let it go to the bottom, and then start shaking it and bring it back. He goes, man, they crushed that thing. And he doesn't have any forward imaging. Yeah. He goes, I get it now. Like, you have the bait that we probably never used in the past before, because who would have thought to do that? We would have kite-teched them or whatever we did back then. But he's like, man, they just eat the crap out of that thing. He has no idea. He didn't know they were following it or ever. He just went to a great area and threw it around and crushed them. And Carl Jochumsen was fishing. I learned this with Brandon in a fall open last year. I think it was a fall classic. Same thing. No access to the forward imaging. Because if Polinick has forward imaging around, even though he's not the biggest guy, he hogs it. Like you can't even get around him to like look at it to see what he's seeing. And him and Carl fishing this tournament. I know. I hope he hears this. And Carl goes, they were eating the Jig Head minnow so good that I was just blindly casting it. Bombing it out there, let it go to the bottom, and start shaking it on the way back. And Brandon said most of the day Carl outfished him. So you know what I mean? Like you're right. It's 100%. It's not you don't need the sonar to do it. It's a technique that I think came maybe from the sonar, but super.
I've been hanging a minnow forever on 2D, right? Like probably 6-7 years hanging a minnow down, moping it, tight lining it down, but shaking it. I never really put 2 and 2 together until forward facing. And then there's days that I spot lock and I don't have a turret. And, you know, trolling motors going left and right in 2-foot waves. I'm like, well, I know the rock pile's there. I just need to make sure I count my bait down to 14 foot or wherever I want it to be and slowly work it back. And every once in a while, you'll see it as you're panning back. You're like, okay, I'm in the right spot. And half the time I don't even see the fish eat it because my trolling motor's moving so fast. So it's like
it is true. Like it doesn't have
Great
to be
Lakes waves.
Yeah. You do Great Lake waves on a boat. I would never. Great Lake scares me. I would be in a 42 footer if I was guiding every day.
It's fine. One day I'll get you over here and we'll have some fun.
Oh man. Well, yeah, well, vice versa. I'll get you over. You can see the Columbia River and we'll trade. I'd like to go catch some of those big buffalo smallies.
Get some content out of it.
Yeah, be a good weekend.
Well,
cool.
Anything else you want to touch on, Jake, here before we wrap up? I know we went on a super long rant there about the non-ShAAker, but it happens.
Yeah, it's my fault. I apologize. No, I think that's cool. I think anybody that tries this out, we appreciate feedback too. That's the one cool thing about Alpha. Everything's pretty much designed by
anglers,
our customers. Yeah. So
sweet.
Fun way to fish. Can't wait to go do it again.
Perfect. Yeah, me either.
Skip out on some work maybe today.
I should have went this morning before the hurricane remnants got here, but I decided to sleep in, so I needed it.
It makes me feel bad when I know I could be in a half an hour. I could be to Coeur d'Alene Lake, which is fishing amazing right now, and I'm like, and you can't go fishing or you'll die.
Yeah, no, there's no wind. It's just like deluge of rain. It would have been a very uncomfortable boat ride. So drenched all the way to the briefs. It would have been fantastic. So, all right, Jake. Well, we're gonna wrap it up here. I want to say thank you again for joining us on the Lure Lab, and look forward to chatting with you again. You know, fancy fishing shows. We're gonna be rounding them out here soon. So, greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, I love being on the shows. I appreciate it. You guys haven't kicked me off yet, so
it might be coming.
If you ask Adam Deacon, it probably is not far away.
Yes. So,
right on.
All right, Jake. Thanks again for hopping on here, and we'll chat soon.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Well, thank you for tuning in to this week's episode here on the Lure Lab. I'm going to link it down below over to the Alpha Angler website because they're not available on Omnia yet, but I do encourage everyone to go check the ShAAker Head out on the Alpha Angler website. We greatly appreciate everyone who tunes in here on a weekly basis. If you're new on the YouTube and you love forward-facing sonar or not, let us know down in the comments. Hit that subscribe button. If you're tuning in on your favorite podcast platform and it allows you to leave a review, please do so. We greatly appreciate that as well. And we will catch everyone next week.